Every single day in America, 9 billion gallons of water get dumped onto lawns and gardens. That's billion with a B. And here's the part that should make every gardener a little sick to their stomach. According to the EPA, roughly half of that water never even reaches the roots. It evaporates off the surface of the soil, runs down the driveway into the storm drain, or soaks so deep it blows right past where your tomato plants could actually use it. Meanwhile, a group of farmers in Kenya ran an experiment using a clay pot that was designed over 4,000 years ago, buried terracotta vessels in the ground next to their tomato plants. And when researchers measured the results, published in the Journal of Natural Sciences Research in 2013, those simple clay pots saved 97.8% of the water compared to traditional irrigation. Not 50%, not 70, 97. A 4,000-year-old piece of pottery outperformed most modern irrigation systems. And that's just one of the methods we're going to cover today, because it turns out your garden doesn't need you standing there with a hose every evening. There are at least 5 proven systems that let your soil do the watering for you, some of them for weeks at a time, and some of them for years. And the wildest part, most of them cost almost nothing to build. So let's get into it. Starting with the oldest trick in the book, literally. The method is called olla irrigation, and if you've never heard that word before, it's pronounced oya. An olla is just an unglazed clay pot, buried in your garden soil and filled with water. That's the whole system. Sounds too simple to work, right? But here's the science behind it. When you fire terracotta at around 1,000 degrees, the clay develops millions of tiny pores throughout its walls. Think of it like a very slow sponge. When you bury that porous pot in dry soil and fill it with water, the moisture seeps outward through the clay walls toward the surrounding earth. The drier the soil gets, the more water the pot releases. And when it rains and the soil is already soaked, the pot basically shuts off on its own because there's no moisture difference pulling water through the walls. It's called soil moisture tension, and it means the plant is essentially telling the pot when it's thirsty. You don't need a timer, you don't need electricity, and you definitely don't need to stand there guessing whether your tomatoes had enough water today. The roots grow right up to the olla's surface and drink exactly what they need. The earliest written description of this technique comes from a Chinese agricultural text called the Fan Shengqi Shu, written during the Western Han Dynasty in the 1st century BCE. The author instructed farmers to bury a 6-liter clay jar in each planting pit. David Bainbridge, a professor of ecology and the leading modern authority on olla irrigation, believes the practice goes back even further, possibly 4,000 years or more. And versions of it spread across ancient Rome, Mesopotamia, and pre-Columbian America, where the Hohokam people of the American Southwest used buried clay pots in the desert. Today, this exact same method is still in daily use across India, Iran, Brazil, and Burkina Faso. The technology hasn't changed because it doesn't need to. Now, the Kenya study I mentioned earlier isn't the only one showing wild results. Researchers in Bolivia tested Ollas on potato crops and recorded yields of 42,000 kilograms per hectare compared to just 18,000 with traditional irrigation. That's a 133% increase in yield while using a fraction of the water. And weed growth dropped by 87% because the surface soil stays dry. Only the root zone gets moisture. So here's how you build one this weekend for about $4. Grab 2 matching unglazed terracotta pots from any garden center. Seal the drainage hole on one of them with a piece of tile and waterproof silicone. Then glue the 2 pots together rim to rim with that same silicone. Let it cure for 24 hours. Test it for leaks, and you've got a sealed vessel with 1 open hole on top for filling. Bury it in your garden bed with about 1 inch or 2 sticking above the soil line. Plant everything within about 3 feet of the olla, and cover the top with a terracotta saucer to keep dirt and mosquitoes out. Fill it up and walk away. Depending on your climate and how many plants are drinking from it, you'll refill every 2 to 7 days. And the pot itself lasts 5 to 8 years before the pores start to clog. A quick scrub with vinegar brings them back to life. One heads up though, if you live somewhere with freezing winters, pull your ollas out of the ground before the frost hits. Water expands when it freezes, and frozen water inside clay is a recipe for a very expensive pile of terracotta shards. But ollas have a limitation. Each one only waters a circle about 3 to 4 feet wide. So if you want to scale up to a full raised bed without burying a dozen clay pots, you need a different approach. And that brings us to the wicking bed. A wicking bed is basically a raised garden with a hidden water tank built into the bottom. You fill the tank through a pipe, and water travels upward through the soil by capillary action, the same force that lets a paper towel soak up a spill. The soil pulls moisture from below, keeping the root zone consistently damp while the surface stays dry. The modern wicking bed was invented by a guy named Colin Austin, a software engineer turned water management innovator living in Queensland, Australia. He developed the concept in the mid-1990s after getting fed up with the country's brutal, unpredictable rainfall patterns. His insight was simple. The problem isn't that there's no water. The problem is that rain shows up in massive bursts with long, dry gaps in between. So he built what he called an underground pond beneath a raised garden bed that could store water from the wet days and release it slowly during the dry ones. The design took off across Australia during the Millennium Drought, which lasted from 1997 to 2009 and remains one of the worst droughts in Australian recorded history. Gardeners across Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane started building wicking beds out of recycled IBC totes, old bathtubs, and timber frames lined with pond liner. And the science backs it up. Researchers at the University of South Australia tested wicking beds in controlled experiments and found that mulched wicking beds saved 43% more water per kilogram of lettuce produced compared to conventional surface watering. The key finding was that the effective wicking height maxes out at about 12 inches, so your soil layer above the reservoir shouldn't be deeper than that. Building one is more involved than an olla, but totally doable in a weekend. You need a raised bed frame, a sheet of pond liner to make it waterproof, coarse gravel for the reservoir layer at the bottom, geotextile fabric to separate gravel from soil, a PVC fill pipe, and an overflow pipe so heavy rain doesn't waterlog your plants. Layer it up, gravel on the bottom, about 6 to 8 inches deep, fabric over the gravel, soil on top, 10 to 12 inches deep. Fill pipe goes down through the soil into the gravel so you can add water to the reservoir without disturbing anything. Overflow pipe sits at the top of the gravel layer and exits through the side of the bed. Mulch the surface. Done. The result? Instead of watering every day or two, you're refilling the reservoir maybe once a week in summer and once a month in winter. Some gardeners report leaving their wicking beds completely unattended for 2 to 4 weeks without any plant stress. And because the surface stays dry, you get fewer weeds and almost zero fungal disease on your leaves. Budget-wise, a solid wicking bed runs anywhere from about $50 if you're cutting an IBC tote in half, up to around $400 if you're building a nice timber frame from scratch. The liner is the biggest expense, but it lasts over a decade. Now, a few mistakes I see people make with wicking beds all the time. The first one is making the soil layer too deep. Remember that 12-inch maximum. If you pack 18 inches of soil above the reservoir, the water physically cannot wick high enough to reach the top layer, and your shallow-rooted plants like lettuce and herbs will struggle while your deeper-rooted tomatoes do fine. It's confusing when half your bed looks great and the other half looks miserable, but the fix is simply matching soil depth to the physics of capillary action. The second mistake is forgetting to flush the bed a few times per season. Because water moves upward, salts and minerals concentrate near the soil surface over time. If you notice a white, crusty layer forming on top of the soil, that's mineral buildup. Give the bed a heavy overhead watering once a month or so to push those salts back down and out through the overflow pipe. And the third one is skipping the mulch. I know it sounds minor, but 2 to 3 inches of straw or wood chips on the surface keeps that top layer of soil from drying into a hard crust. The combination of bottom-up wicking and top-down mulch protection creates this perfect moisture sandwich that plant roots absolutely thrive in. If you're finding this useful so far, hit that subscribe button. I cover gardening methods like this every single week, and there's a lot more coming in this video alone. Because Ollas and wicking beds are great, but they still need you to physically refill them every few days or weeks. What if I told you there's a method where you build the bed once, water it the first year, and then basically never water it again for the next decade or two? That's Hugelkultur. Hugelkultur is a German word that means mound culture, and the concept is dead simple. You pile up a bunch of logs and branches, cover them with soil, and plant into the mound. As the wood slowly decomposes over years, it turns into a massive sponge that absorbs rainwater and releases it gradually to your plant roots. Meanwhile, the decomposition process feeds your soil with nutrients and generates gentle heat that actually extends your growing season. The technique was first formally documented in 1962 by a German gardener named Hermann André, who noticed the incredible diversity of plants growing in a pile of old woody debris in his grandmother's garden. But the real ambassador for Hugelkultur is an Austrian farmer named Sepp Holzer, one of the most fascinating characters in modern agriculture. Holzer took over his parents' mountain farm, the Krameterhof, in 1962. The farm sits at an altitude of 1,500 meters in a region of Austria that locals call Mini Siberia. 170 frost days per year. Average temperature of 4 degrees Celsius. Winters hitting -20. Austrian biologist Bernd Lutsch nicknamed him the agricultural rebel because he kept building Hugelkultur mounds and permaculture ponds, despite getting fined and even threatened with imprisonment by local authorities who thought he was crazy. His farm grew to 45 hectares with 70 ponds, and it became the most famous permaculture demonstration site in the world, all in a climate where the local agricultural authorities insisted real farming was impossible. Here's how to build your own. First, gather your wood. Hardwoods like alder, maple, oak, and apple work best. Partially rotted wood is actually ideal because it's already started absorbing moisture. Stay away from black walnut, which releases a toxin called juglone that kills most garden plants. Cedar and black locust are too rot-resistant to break down effectively. Dig an optional trench about 1 to 2 feet deep. Stack your biggest logs on the bottom, then pile on medium branches, then a thick layer of nitrogen-rich green material like grass clippings and kitchen scraps, then finished compost, and finally a few inches of topsoil on the outside. Water it deeply during construction. A good Hugelkultur mound starts about 3 to 6 feet tall and settles down over time as the wood compresses. Now here's the honest truth about year 1. The decomposing wood actually steals nitrogen from your soil in the first season because the microbes breaking it down need nitrogen to do their work. Your plants might look a little sad. The fix is simple. Plant nitrogen-fixing crops like beans and peas in year 1, and add extra compost or grass clippings to feed those hungry microbes. By year 2, the wood has absorbed so much rainwater that it acts like a reservoir running the entire length of your bed. The Old Farmer's Almanac reports that established Hugelkultur beds of sufficient height may need no irrigation at all after the second year. A gardener named Greg Auton up in Nova Scotia, who calls himself the Maritime Gardener, says he doesn't water his Hugelkultur beds all summer long. And a practitioner in Wyoming, a state that gets only 11 inches of rain a year, calls his Hugelkultur sections absolutely the most beautiful and productive parts of our garden that consume the least water. The beds keep producing for 10 to 20 years before the wood fully breaks down. And when it finally does, you're left with some of the richest, darkest soil you've ever seen. Then you just rebuild with fresh logs and start the cycle again. I should mention though, Most of the evidence for Hugelkultur is anecdotal rather than from controlled scientific studies. A 2024 study did find measurable improvements in soil carbon content and reduced waterlogging, which is a good start, but this method does not have nearly the peer-reviewed backing that Ollas and Wicking beds do. What it does have is centuries of real-world use across Germany and Eastern Europe, plus thousands of modern gardeners who swear by it. And the best part? The cost is basically free if you have access to fallen wood, branches, and leaves. One gardener built complete beds for a total investment of $4 in seeds with every other material sourced from the property. Now let me hit you with a few more methods worth knowing about, because the deeper you go into self-watering, the more options open up. Keyhole gardens were developed in the African nation of Lesotho in the mid-1990s by an organization called C-Safe, the Consortium for Southern Africa Food Security Emergency. They were designed specifically for people living with AIDS and HIV who were too sick for traditional farming. The design is a circular raised bed about 6 feet across with a wedge-shaped notch cut into one side for access, like looking down at an old-fashioned keyhole. In the center sits a wire mesh composting basket. You toss kitchen scraps and gray water into that central basket. As the material decomposes, nutrients and moisture spread outward through the surrounding soil. The stone walls trap heat and moisture inside. According to BBC reporting, 3 keyhole gardens can feed a family of 10 for an entire year. C-Safe built over 20,000 of these gardens, and when they came back to check on them years later, more than 90% were still being actively used. The beauty of a keyhole garden is that it combines composting and irrigation into one system. You're feeding the soil and watering it at the same time with your kitchen waste. And because the bed is circular and raised about waist high, you can reach every part of the growing area from the keyhole notch without bending down or stepping on the soil. That accessibility was the whole point of the original design for people who were physically weak, but it turns out it's also just really good ergonomic garden design for anyone. Building one yourself costs anywhere from nothing if you stack local stones to about $200 with purchased materials. They've spread beyond Africa into Texas and the American Southwest, where master gardener workshops teach the technique specifically for hot, dry conditions. The same design that feeds families in Lesotho also thrives in the scorching heat of an Austin, Texas backyard. Then there's the Kratky method, which is about as far from traditional gardening as you can get while still growing food. Invented by Dr. Bernard Kratky at the University of Hawaii and published in 2009, it's passive hydroponics with zero electricity. You suspend a plant in a net pot above a container of nutrient solution. The roots dip into the water, and as the plant drinks, the water level drops, exposing upper roots to air where they become oxygen roots. It doesn't need pumps, aerators, or timers. A single fill can grow a head of lettuce from seedling to harvest in 4 to 6 weeks. Startup cost is as low as $10 to $20 per container. And for the simplest possible upgrade to your existing garden, look into Biochar. It's essentially charcoal made through a process called pyrolysis, and it absorbs up to 5 times its weight in water. The wild thing about biochar is that it persists in soil for over 2,500 years. The most famous example is terra preta, the incredibly fertile dark earth soils created by pre-Columbian civilizations in the Amazon that are still productive today, thousands of years after the people who made them disappeared. Beyond biochar, just increasing the organic matter in your soil makes a massive difference. The USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service has highlighted that each 1% increase in soil organic matter can help soil hold thousands of additional gallons of water per acre. And a thick layer of mulch on top of all that reduces surface evaporation by 40 to 60%. Straw, wood chips, shredded leaves, anything that keeps direct sunlight off the soil surface. So here's the big picture. These methods aren't competing with each other. They're complementary. The The smartest self-watering garden combines multiple systems based on what you're growing and where. For your raised beds with annual vegetables, build wicking beds. The consistent root zone moisture is perfect for tomatoes, lettuce, peppers, and herbs. For individual fruit trees or large perennial plants, bury ollas nearby for targeted deep watering. For permanent garden areas where you want zero maintenance, build Hugelkultur mounds and let them do their thing for the next 20 years. For small urban spaces or balcony gardens, the cracky method and sub-irrigated planters give you self-watering in containers. And if you have a steady stream of kitchen scraps and want to build soil fertility while you conserve water, a keyhole garden does both jobs at once. Across everything, build your soil with compost and biochar. Then mulch like your water bill depends on it, because it does. And speaking of water bills, let's talk about the money for a second. The average American household spends around $500 a year on water. If 30% of that goes to outdoor irrigation, that's $150 a year you're literally pouring onto the ground. Cut that in half with a few ollas in a wicking bed, and you've paid for the materials in the first season. Go full Hugelkultur on your permanent beds and the savings compound for the next 20 years. This isn't just about being environmentally responsible, although it is that. It's about keeping money in your pocket while growing better food with less effort. The thing that blows my mind about all of this is that the most water-efficient irrigation method ever tested, the olla, is also the oldest. 4,000 years old, and a Kenyan research team proved it saves more water than anything modern engineering has come up with. The Aztecs built entire floating gardens in the lakes around Tenochtitlan that watered themselves through capillary action, feeding over 200,000 people. The Persians carved underground tunnels called qanats that transported water for over 20 kilometers using nothing but gravity, and over 30,000 of those systems are still working in Iran today. We didn't invent water-efficient gardening, we forgot it. And now, in a world where water scarcity is hitting harder every single year, these ancient techniques aren't just interesting history, they're the future. So pick one method, start this weekend. An olla takes 30 minutes and $4. A wicking bed takes a Saturday afternoon. Hugelkultur takes a weekend of honest work, but pays you back for 2 decades. Your garden doesn't need you babysitting it with a hose, it just needs the right system underneath it. If this is the kind of content you're into, hit subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the next one.